Emily mentioned student debt. We will take a closer look at how that is taking a toll on middle-class America. I spoke to Amy Laitinen from the New American Foundation, and I asked her if the average student debt of $26,000 per person was shocking.
I think it is a shocking number, and I think when you look at the individual amount, so this is the average student now is graduating with the average student who graduates with debt is graduating with over $26,000. About 2/3 of all college students are graduating with debt, and combined, students owe more than $1 trillion in student debt. That's more than credit card debt. So it's a shocking number. I mean, I think sort of one-on-one, you're like, oh, 26,000, yeah, it's a lot. But when you consider that in the 90s, very few people borrowed to pay for college, and you put it in perspective now, and more than 2/3 are borrowing and borrowing that much, it's pretty significant.
Well, I mean, that's a good point, because I was just going to say, when we talked to some of our colleagues who graduated perhaps in the 80s and 90s,
yep,
there was a lot of talk that taking on student debt was so-called good debt. And of course, now we look back and we say, well, maybe it's not such good debt. Is there such a thing as good debt for student loans?
Well, I do think that college can really be a good investment, but I think you have to be very careful about it. So, and I think this is one of the ways in which students aren't getting the right types of information. We all know and hear that a college education is absolutely worth it. And if you look at the numbers of unemployment and earnings for those with a college degree, for those without, there's no question that people need a college degree right now. But then there are questions about which college, at which price, and for how long. So it may be in somebody's economic interest to go to a community college for 2 years and then transfer to a state public school. Like, average state tuition right now is about $13,000 a year. For the nonprofit privates and for-profits, it's about $31,000 a year.
That leads us to the reason why people take on debt to go to college is to hopefully upgrade themselves and move up class levels.
Yep.
And that leads us to the middle class. How does this debt burden affect the efforts of Americans to, for a lot of them, try to get into the middle class?
So it's a great question. I mean, there's this great cartoon I saw, it might have been in the New Yorker, where a student was coming home with his cap and gown and his diploma and was on his parents' doorstep, basically looking to move back in, and his parents had their arms folded and they said, when we were your age, we started with nothing. And he has this huge bag of debt on his back, and he is saying, oh, I wish I started with nothing.
Well, so are some students, and I hate to generalize here, but there's this belief that perhaps it's the students that are graduating now have very high expectations that not only is the debt not important, but they expect certain things out of society, and that leads to an unrealistic expectation of what really the middle class is supposed to be.
Well, I think there are a lot of different things there, and I don't think that college is going to solve all of those issues. I mean, I think that you have stagnating wages, which haven't kept up with the costs of inflation and with higher education tuition prices. So in some ways, I feel like that's a related issue, but a little bit separate from the fact that students go in thinking that they're going to make their lives better, and they come out not just with a degree, but this huge ball and chain that basically makes it much harder for them. I mean, they're starting in the red.
It's a massive liability. Now, okay, so they come out, they get their first job out of college, hopefully. Yep. They begin to save, hopefully.
If they can.
Do you think it's easier or harder to get into the middle class today than it was, say, 20 years ago?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that income mobility is still very difficult for those who are looking, and they're sort of in the bottom rungs trying to make their way into the middle class. And there's a lot to suggest that the middle class is shrinking and that it's harder to stay in the middle class. And certainly 20 years ago, you didn't need a college degree to get into or stay in the middle class, and that's not the case today, which is why people are willing to pay for access to and to stay in the middle class.
Last question, what's your advice to those trying to get into the middle class or having trouble keep staying in the middle class because of this debt issue?
I would say look around, make sure that you compare prices for schools and look at the financial aid options that they're going to provide you. And don't just look at the grand total, look at how much are loans that you're going to have to pay back and look at how much are grants.